Hello, one and all. I'm here to talk to you hip cats about the whoopee. That's right, the whoopee. You might think the whoopee is cool, but it's not. If you engage in it, you might end up looking like this. That's right, you might look like Whoopi Goldberg. Now, you might be asking yourself, why in the heavens would I end up looking like Whoopi Goldberg? And that's really none of your business. Just know it could happen to you at any time during the whoopee, or worse still, it could happen to your partner or partners. Is that really something you want to put yourself through? Just imagine engaging in the whoopee and you open your eyes, which you had closed because the whoopee itself is very scary, only to have Whoopi Goldberg staring right into your soul. The thought is simply horrifying. So please, do yourself and all of us a favor and don't engage in the whoopee, lest you turn into some monstrous hellspawn that even hell rejected. Thank you. Alright, so with that public service announcement out of the way, I'll go ahead and get to Lost Eidolons, a game that, not unsurprisingly, has very little to do with the whoopee. I know what you might be thinking. If not the whoopee, what would a fantasy game actually be about? Dragons? Hermits? Hermit dragons? No, it's primarily about two seemingly heterosexual males that appear destined to confront one another in a there can only be one fight to the end. I would play the song, but I'd rather not deal with some DMCA garbage for a Highlander reference. Anyway, Lost Eidolon fully embraces what it is, and what it is a pretty standard turn-based strategy that drags on a little too long and doesn't offer much more than a parade of characters, some more interesting than others, a story that is stretched way too thin, and game mechanics that anyone who has played a turn-based fantasy game or even just a turn-based game would be all too familiar with. While it might sound like I'm knocking the game, because I am, I will acknowledge that the developers, according to their website, were very much going for a classic turn-based fantasy experience. But even for a game that's consciously sticking to a specific formula that has produced some very entertaining games, the formula that is, or perhaps because it is sticking to that formula, the flaws are difficult to ignore. For instance, while the main campaign battles do offer some variety in the scenery and objectives you have to meet to win a battle, the optional battles are the same two or three scenarios replay. I say two or three because they're really that forgettable. I can't remember if there was two different ones or three different. Just they were really forgettable. The story reason for engaging in these optional battles are different, at least from what you read on the map before you engage in them. But while the reasons might be different, the opponents, scenery, and objectives you have to meet to get through them are the same. I get it. The missions are optional, and I suppose there is something to be said about experimenting with the different powers of your units in these missions, but that doesn't make them any less repetitive and any less underwhelming. I was left wondering what would be left without these optional missions, and it boils down to conversating with NPCs and prepping for the next campaign battle. That includes buying their equipment, stocking them up with potions, scheduling their training regiment. The whole training regiment thing is really just assigning different NPCs to improve two specific skills from one mission to the next. Useful, but not all that, I guess, fun. It's just really click and assign. The conversating with different NPCs is a little bit more involved. Inviting them to have a meal, training with them, or discussing war plans are different types of interactions. But other than a change in scenery and how the conversation starts and ends, there isn't much difference between these types of interactions. So, in short, they boil down to the same thing: talk to the NPCs and you improve your relationship with them. To achieve what? Well, that's a question mark after that. Well, some of them will give you an item at a high enough relationship level, while others will simply reveal more about themselves. Oh, and you only have a certain amount of points between missions, so you have to be selective about which NPCs you want to improve your relationship with. You could increase your maximum amount of interaction or prestige points, which is what they're called in the game, by completing prestige missions, which might sound interesting, but they boil down to finding some item around the camp or completing some other mundane task around the camp. So, yes, please contain your excitement. Now on to what's supposed to provide the sense of progression to this game, and that is the story. I say supposed to because at times the game makes you feel like you're just turning the same wheel. This becomes most apparent when all but the top two contenders for the new sovereign of the land remain your character, Eden, and his main rival, Ballister. I use the term sovereign as I have no idea what exactly they're fighting for, and as the story progresses, it becomes pretty murky, and the only real objective seems to be to kill one another. Now, you're made aware that something to this extent was going to happen at the very beginning of the game when you have to flee from a castle because Ballister is after you. What they don't reveal is that you and Ballister will dance around each other and on occasion even openly meet in combat to the point where you wonder why. Why not just engage each other at this point? They are literally placed face to face with each other, probably no more than a dash away from one another, only to have nothing come of that encounter because I don't know. I guess the whole not the right place and time kind of situation is going on there. But then you reach the end of their dance, and without giving much of anything away, you realize no, the whole not the right place and time had nothing to do with it. Why they had nothing to do with why they could not just or why they couldn't just end the whole thing much sooner. It's not a bad story, but there are times when I just found myself saying, "Oh, come on now, just finish already." This might be because I was also getting tired of the gameplay itself, but it's more I was over the rivalry story being played out. By the end of the game, I almost forgot what else the story was about and what was involved. I knew well enough the reason for the rivalry, but what was at stake? Not sure. The Empire, a kingdom, everything. I don't know. The game provides plenty of written encyclopedic entries that I suppose will allow those invested enough in the story to piece things together outside the rivalry story, but I think that was a missed opportunity on the developer's part. Visiting some secret chamber under the Imperial Palace, or even just encountering a mythical creature that reveals some deep truth of the world as the true rivals go at each other, would have enhanced the delivery of the story would not would not only have enhanced the delivery of the story, but also had the added bonus of enhancing the delivery of the context in which the story took place. And that's really my biggest gripe with the game. Aside from the camp and the select location in which battles take place, not the optional battles, those are the same things recycled, but the main campaign battles, the delivery of this game's world falls short. There is not a single location that I can say stood out or that expressed any significantly unique qualities. When it comes to the companions you interact with, there is a similar issue to be had. Yes, they all have their own unique backstory and they do physically appear different from one another, but gameplay wise, they become rather interchangeable with any other character of the same class. What I mean is that this game has a similar aesthetic to another game, also happened to be made by a Korean developer, Kingdom Under Fire. But where Kingdom Under Fire did a really good job at separating its characters from one another by providing them with unique abilities and a very distinct look, this game does a poor job at making its characters truly distinct from one another in the same way. It doesn't help that when you get a character to a specific class, they all wear the same armor, or that the weapons they use don't vary much in their visual or function, aside from named weapons, which are seems to be very rare to find, or that characters repeat their same lines each time you use them, so you just end up skipping over the visuals and lines because they do become repetitive. Now, to be fair, you can simply let some of the non-main characters die, which I believe you are supposed to let them. You are supposed to let that happen, as many of the characters simply become redundant. But that's kind of a hard pill to swallow for me. I usually like to keep the characters alive, but I think this is one of the first games where I felt that maybe I should just let these characters die because they serve very little purpose. Well, that just about wraps it up for this game. Putting it through my not entirely arbitrary numerical scoring metric leaves the game at some 2.5 out of 5. I didn't encounter anything that prevented me from playing through the game, bugs, glitches, or anything of that sort. So functionally, the game is fine. The combat, as lackluster as it might be, is competently designed. The story, well, while I have my complaints about it, is coherent, and even the companion characters, as much as they might lack battlefield uniqueness, do stand apart from one another, at least in conversation, yeah, if in nothing else. However, there isn't much of an excuse for the repetitive optional missions or the mundane prestige missions, or worse yet, that for a fantasy world, there was very little that was fantastical about it. What I mean is that, yes, some of the characters do have magical powers, and there are magical items and weapons, and there is even the appearance of a magical creature or two. But there is little about this world that seems to be impacted by the fact that magic exists. Take magic out of this world, and you really don't have to rewrite much of anything of how this world fundamentally works or how the story really played out. It can be summed up as such a it could be summed up as such, a world that happens to have magic as opposed to a magical world. This isn't a case of a low magic world either. Way too much magic is in play for it to be something like that. So it seems to be. I also don't think it's a high magic world, but magic worlds aside, it just didn't feel like a an engaging world. It felt very stale, kind of dry, I guess, terms that kind of express how the game came across to me. Anyway, I rambled off long enough, and if you made it this deep into the video without skipping, I can only imagine you're in a desperate struggle for your life that prevented you from moving on. Well, good luck, and till next time, if you happen to make it from your if you happen to make it out of the clutches of your assailant.